Have you ever wondered what would happen if you stepped into a path that never ends and never lets you turn back? Some secrets are buried for a reason. You won't find them on maps. You won't read about them online. They only exist in forgotten books or in the haunted eyes of those who barely made it out alive. Today's story takes us to one such place, a labyrinth, not just a maze, but a prison built of shadows. A place where the walls seem to whisper and the air grows. Colder the deeper you go. A place where nothing is what it seems and something is always watching. And at the heart of this nightmare is a girl named Lena. She took the first step into the labyrinth, not knowing that every step forward would take her further from reality and closer to something dark, something ancient, something alive. But what did she see? Why did she go in? And most importantly, did she ever make it out? We'll get to that. But for now, just remember one thing. Some doors should never be opened, and some places were never meant to be found. This is just the beginning. It started with a package unmarked, wrapped in old brown paper, and left at Lena's doorstep. There was no return address, no postage stamp, and no note. Just her name scrawled in ink that looked faded, almost as if it had been written decades. Hug. At first she assumed it was a mistake. She wasn't expecting anything and she didn't recognize the handwriting. Curiosity, however, got the better of her. Carefully she peeled back the brittle paper, revealing a worn leather folder. Inside the folder was a single item, a map. It was unlike any map Lena had ever seen. The paper was yellowed with age, the corners curled and brittle, and the lines were drawn by hand in dark, uneven ink. There were no recognizable landmarks, no street names, no compass rose to indicate direction. It was a series of winding corridors, sharp turns, dead ends, and symbols she didn't understand, spirals, eyes, strange runes. At the center of the maze was a small red mark in the shape of an X. The ink looked fresh compared to the rest of the map, as if it had been added recently. Something about it felt wrong. Not fake, not staged, but deeply, unsettlingly real. She examined the edges of the map for clues, a date, a signature, anything that could explain its origin. But there was nothing. Just that maze and that crimson X in the center. The paper smelled faintly of earth and mold, like it had been buried for years. When she ran her fingers along the lines, she could feel the grooves pressed into the surface, as though whoever made it had carved the ink in with pressure and intention. This wasn't printed. This was personal. Lena couldn't explain why, but the map drew her in. She couldn't stop looking at it. That night she dreamed about narrow hallways and cold stone beneath her feet. She heard echoes in the distance, footsteps that didn't belong to her. And when she woke, the map was still on her desk, waiting. The days that followed were filled with obsession. She scanned the map, traced the paths with her finger again, and again, searching for a pattern or code. She showed it to a few friends, but they only laughed and said it looked like something from a fantasy novel. But Lena felt it was more than that. It was calling to her not with sound, but with presence. A weight in the room, an itch in the back of her mind that wouldn't leave her alone. One afternoon, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. The bottom corner of the map had smudges of dirt and what looked like dried blood. It wasn't much, just a faded smear, but it chilled her. Who had held this map before her? And why did they never come back for it? She started having visions, not dreams anymore, but flashes during the day. A corridor lit by torches. A stone, wall with claw marks. A figure at the end of a hallway that would disappear the moment she blinked. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt closer to whatever the map was leading her to. And yet, she didn't know where the entrance was. Until she did. It wasn't a place she had ever planned to go. Lena stood at the edge of the forest, staring at the narrow dirt path that disappeared between the trees. In her hand was the map, now folded and worn from constant handling. The forest was dense, quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, no wind, just a stillness that pressed in around her. The locals had warned her in their own indirect ways. When she asked about the symbols on the map at a nearby town, the conversations always grew cold. Some would pretend not to hear her. Others would change the topic, their eyes darting away. One elderly woman simply said, "Some paths ain't meant for walking," before turning her back on Lena and shuffling away. Despite all of it, Lena couldn't turn away. The more people dismissed the map, the more certain she became that it was real and dangerous. She had tried researching it, but nothing came up. No online records, no legends, no urban myths that matched the layout. It was as if the labyrinth didn't exist in any history, only in this single piece of paper that refused to leave her alone. Something deep in her gut told her that it was not just a maze. It was a trap, a test, or maybe even something older than any explanation she could come up with. But she still had to see it. As she stepped into the forest, the canopy above thickened, blocking out most of the light. The map had no instructions, but her feet seemed to know where to go. She followed an unmarked trail, weaving through trees twisted in strange, unnatural shapes. Vines hung like nooses. Moss covered the ground like a heavy blanket, muffling the sound of her footsteps. Every so often she glanced down at the map, and somehow the layout of the forest matched it. Not precisely, it wasn't that literal, but something about the curves of the trail, the way the trees leaned, mirrored the lines on the parchment. She walked for hours, maybe more. Time became difficult to track. Her phone had no signal, and the clock kept glitching, jumping ahead, then back. She passed stone markers along the way, strange old things carved with the same symbols that filled the labyrinth. Some had eyes. Others had mouths open in silent screams. Each one made her feel like she was being watched, like the forest itself was aware of her presence. But she couldn't stop. She didn't want to. Eventually, she found it. Hidden behind a curtain of ivy was a wall of stone, covered in moss and half buried beneath earth and vines. At first, it looked like part of a ruin, maybe a crumbled building. But then her fingers found the edge, a seam in the wall, a door. She pulled back the ivy, revealing a perfectly rectangular stone doorway, and on its surface, engraved deep into the stone, was the same spiral symbol from the map. The air around it was cold, unnaturally so. The silence grew heavier, more oppressive. Her heart was pounding now, not just from fear, but anticipation. Something in her had been waiting for this. She reached out and touched the spiral. The stone felt warm beneath her hand, warmer than it should have. Lena stepped into the labyrinth with slow, cautious movements, her hand brushing against the damp stone wall beside her. The moment she crossed the threshold, something shifted. It was subtle at first, just a faint change in air pressure, a drop in temperature, but enough for her to notice. The light from the outside world dimmed instantly, swallowed by the thick stone walls that rose high above her. The corridor ahead stretched into darkness, lit only by flickering torches set in iron brackets along the sides. They looked ancient, yet the flames danced as if freshly lit. She paused for a moment, listening. No wind, no sound of insects, no outside noise at all. Her footsteps echoed strangely, as if the walls were absorbing and bending the sound. Every step felt heavier, like she was sinking deeper into something she couldn't see. The narrow hallway seemed to go on forever, turning left and right without any sense of logic or design. She kept the map in her hand, but soon realized it wasn't helping. The paths didn't match anymore. What had been a left turn on the map was now a right. Hallways she expected to be short, stretched out endlessly. Some doors led nowhere, opening into blank stone walls. Others creaked open to reveal paths that hadn't been there before. It didn't take long for her to lose track of time. Minutes felt like hours. Her watch stopped working completely, frozen at 3:47. The battery was fine, but the hands wouldn't move. The air felt heavier now, almost thick enough to choke on. A subtle pressure built in her ears, like the atmosphere itself was pushing against her, resisting her presence. She marked the walls with chalk as she went, trying to keep track of where she'd been, but the marks would disappear. Sometimes they'd change, turning into unfamiliar symbols or smudging into nothing at all. At one point, she circled back to a corridor she knew she had already walked, but everything had shifted. The torches were in different places, the floor slightly tilted and the hallway longer than before. Then there were the sounds. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, a low hum in the distance like machinery buried far beneath the stone. But then it changed. Footsteps behind her, soft breathing in the darkness ahead. Whispers. She turned quickly over and over again, but there was no one there. And yet the feeling of being followed never left her. She couldn't shake the sense that something was just out of sight, always. One corner away, just far enough to avoid her gaze. Some walls had carvings on them, crude etchings of figures that looked almost human, except distorted. Faces twisted in silent agony, hands reaching out, eyes gouged or missing entirely. She didn't know whether they were warnings or records, but they unsettled her deeply. The deeper she went, the more unnatural the place began to feel. The stone under her feet no longer felt like regular stone. It was warmer in some areas, soft in others, almost like skin. The walls would sometimes seem to breathe, rising and falling ever so slightly, like the entire labyrinth was alive. And worst of all, the space itself was warping. She'd walked for 10 minutes in one direction, only to find herself back at a hallway she swore she had left behind long ago. The labyrinth was changing, rearranging, responding. Lena stopped in the middle of the corridor, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment she thought she'd heard something, so soft it could have been mistaken for wind, if there had been any wind. She stood perfectly still, ears straining, eyes flicking between the torchlit shadows. Then it came again. A whisper. Not just any whisper, but her name. Faint, distant, almost gentle. Lena. She turned sharply, heart pounding. No one was there. The corridor behind her was empty, stretching into darkness. The air was still. Her hands began to tremble slightly. It hadn't echoed like a normal voice. It sounded layered, like 2 or 3 voices speaking at once in a breathy murmur. The kind of sound that crawled into your ears and lingered behind your eyes. She took a step forward. The whisper came again, clearer this time. Lena. Drawn, out and deliberate, like something was savoring the sound. It came from ahead, though the labyrinth gave no hint of what lay in that direction. Her instincts screamed for her to turn back, but something stronger pulled her forward, a need to know, to understand who or what was calling her name inside a place that should have been silent. The walls around her started to feel narrower, closer. The torchlight flickered wildly, though there was no breeze. The shadows stretched longer than they should, like the flames were struggling against something unseen. She picked up her pace, eyes scanning every crack in the stone, every turn ahead. At each junction she heard the whisper again, just enough to suggest the right path, always leading her deeper. It wasn't like a voice guiding her. It was more like bait, luring her closer to something just out of sight. She passed another strange marking on the wall, a single eye carved into the stone, slightly bulging as if watching her. Beneath it was a groove, almost like a tear trail. She reached out to touch it, but pulled her hand back instinctively. It felt wrong to make contact. The walls were starting to feel alive again, throbbing slightly under her feet, humming at a pitch just below hearing. Her name came again, louder, almost playful now. It echoed not just in her ears, but in her bones. She rounded another corner and froze. There was something ahead. Just for a second, quick enough that she could have imagined it, she saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor, tall, pale, unmoving. She blinked and it was gone. The air where it had stood felt colder. She walked forward slowly, uncertain. The corridor twisted again, and she lost the spot where the figure had been. But the whispers continued, now more frequent. Her name again, and now other sounds, broken words, unfinished sentences, sobs, laughter. It was as if the labyrinth had become a voice itself, speaking from all directions, using her name as the anchor. Sometimes it sounded like her own voice. The worst was when the whisper came from directly beside her, though nothing was there. Her skin prickled, heart thudding hard enough to echo in her ears. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to breathe quietly. From somewhere up ahead, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone running. Not toward her, but away. Rapid, footsteps fading quickly, like someone else trapped inside was desperately trying to escape. Or worse, being chased. Lena moved carefully now, each step a quiet negotiation between fear and compulsion. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse. Her name no longer floated through the air, but its echo lingered in her thoughts, as if the sound had embedded itself inside her. The labyrinth was no longer just a place, it felt like a consciousness, aware of her every move, responding to her hesitation, drawing her forward when she faltered. She followed the corridor as it curved downward, the ground sloping subtly beneath her feet. The torches were gone now. The light that remained came from no clear source. It was dim, grey, as if the very stone around her glowed with a lifeless shimmer. The walls were tighter here, the air colder and damp, carrying a metallic scent that made her stomach turn. She thought of blood, rust, and something older, something rotting. As she descended, the path opened into a circular chamber. The space was wide, the ceiling vaulted high above with jagged stone arches that looked unstable, as if they had been carved by something violent. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, short and made of the same black stone that lined the walls. Something lay on top of it. Lena approached slowly, footsteps muffled by the uneven ground. As she got closer, her breath caught. It was a doll, old, handmade, and disturbingly lifelike. Its glass eyes stared blankly up at her, and its mouth was stitched shut with fine red thread. The dress it wore was tattered, stained dark at the hem. One of its arms was missing, the fabric at the shoulder ripped and frayed. As Lena leaned in, she realized the doll's hair was real, human, and there, sewn into the collar of the dress, was a name stitched in faded thread. Lena, she recoiled, heart racing, but something behind her clicked. Not a mechanical sound, but a deep organic noise, like a pulse or a breath. She turned quickly, but the chamber was still empty. The walls now seemed to press in just slightly, as if reacting to her discovery. Her instincts told her to leave, but her body remained rooted in place. She couldn't look away from the doll. Its stitched mouth seemed to throb slightly, like something inside was trying to speak through it. Then she noticed the floor. It was not stone like the rest of the labyrinth. It was made of bones. Human bones, layered and packed tightly together, stretching out across the entire room. Some were cracked, others were perfectly preserved. Skulls peeked out between ribs and femurs, their hollow sockets pointed toward the pedestal, as if they had all died looking at it. A faint humming noise began to rise from the walls, not mechanical, not electrical, but guttural, like a throat clearing far in the distance. The walls began to shimmer faintly, revealing outlines that hadn't been visible before, shapes moving behind the stone, figures shifting just out of reach, like shadows trapped behind a thin veil. Lena took a step back, and the light dimmed further. A low, creaking groan echoed through the chamber, and from the far wall a new passage opened, one that hadn't been there before. It was narrow, lined with carvings, and glowing faintly red.